Chasing Lincoln's Killer, Chapter 6. Edwin Stanton continued his investigation as Abraham Lincoln slept his last deep sleep at the Peterson house. His brain was dead and beyond dreaming. By 4 a.m., Stanton was sure that he was dealing with a conspiracy. The evidence found in Booth's hotel room included the mysterious Sam letter that seemed to predict the assassination. The recovery of this letter, which Booth had carelessly, perhaps on purpose, let fall into the hands of the manhunters, was obviously addressed to the actor by an unknown conspirator. Stanton read it and recognized that it was full of clues. Booth had at least two co-conspirators named Sam and Mike. Sam was in Baltimore, the assassination was premeditated, planned before March 27th, and the Confederacy might be involved. At the Peterson house, a doctor recorded statistics in the notes he kept, tracking the sad and inevitable deterioration of Lincoln's condition that night. 5:50 a.m. Respiration 28 and regular sleeping. 6 o'clock a.m. Pulse failing, respiration 28. 6:30 a.m. Still failing and labored breathing. At the Peterson house, Abraham Lincoln began the death struggle. The end was coming fast. Surgeon General Barnes placed his finger on the pulse in Lincoln's neck. Dr. Leal placed his finger on the pulse in Lincoln's wrist. Another doctor placed his hand over Lincoln's heart. The doctors and nearly every man in the room took watches out of their pockets. It was 7:20 a.m., April 15, 1865. More than once they had thought Lincoln had passed away, but the strong body resisted death many times through the long night. Abraham Lincoln took his last breath. His heart stopped beating at 7:22 and 10 seconds. It was over. "He is gone. He is dead," one of the doctors said. The occupants of the room stood silent and motionless for a few minutes. Edwin Stanton finally spoke. He asked Reverend Gurley, Lincoln's pastor, whether he would say a few words. "I will speak to God," replied the minister. "Let us pray." He summoned up a very moving prayer, then murmured, "Amen." Stanton broke the long silence. Now he belongs to the angels. Stanton reached for a pen and paper and wrote a single sentence. There was nothing else to say. It was the telegram that would transmit the sad news to the nation. Washington City, April 15, 1865. Major General Dix, New York. Abraham Lincoln died this morning at 22 minutes after 7 o'clock. Edwin M. Stanton. Reverend Gurley and Lincoln's eldest son, Robert, told Mary the news. She would not go to the room where Lincoln had died. She could not bear it. She never saw her husband's face again. Around 9 a.m., she left the Peterson house for the White House. The room was empty of all visitors except Edwin Stanton. The morning light streamed through the back windows, crossed Lincoln's still face. Stanton closed the blinds, took a small knife or pair of scissors from his pocket, and bent over Lincoln's body. Gently, he cut a generous lock of hair and sealed it in a plain white envelope. Stanton signed his name in ink on the envelope, then addressed the envelope to Mrs. Wells. The memento was not for him, but for Mary Jane Wells, wife of the Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Wells, and one of Mary Todd Lincoln's few friends in Washington. In 1862, she had helped nurse Willie Lincoln, ill with typhoid fever, until his death. Afterward, she did double duty, nursing Tad Lincoln and caring for Mrs. Lincoln, helpless in her grief. Shortly thereafter, the Wells' own young son died of diphtheria. With that event, Mary Jane Wells and Mary Todd Lincoln shared a loss that brought them even closer to each other. Stanton knew that if any person in Washington deserved a precious lock of the martyr's hair, it was Mary Jane Wells. She later framed the cherished relic with dried flowers that had decorated Abraham Lincoln's coffin at the White House funeral. Stanton gazed down at his fallen chief and wept. It was time to take Lincoln home. Stanton ordered soldiers to transport the president back to the executive mansion. The men arrived with a plain pine box. It looked like a shipping crate, not a proper coffin for the head of state. Lincoln would not have minded. He had always been a man of simple tastes. This was the plain coffin of a rail splitter. The soldiers wrapped Lincoln in an American flag. They placed him in the box and screwed down the lid. The only sound in the room was the squeaking of the screws being tightened in the holes. The soldiers carried the coffin into the street and loaded it onto the back of a simple horse-drawn wagon. The driver snapped the reins and the modest parade, escorted by a small group of bareheaded officers on foot, took Abraham Lincoln to the White House. There were no bands, drums, or trumpets, just the beat of the hooves and the footsteps of the officers. Lincoln would have liked the simplicity. Vice President Andrew Johnson was not present when Lincoln died, so the cabinet sent him an official notification of the president's death and of his succession to the presidency. Johnson agreed to take the oath of office at 11 a.m. in his hotel room at the Kirkwood House. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Solomon Chase and the cabinet members found Johnson grave, dignified, and deeply moved. Given the tragic and unique circumstances of his elevation to the presidency, it was decided that it would not be appropriate for him to deliver a formal public inaugural address. Though John Surratt was being sought by Stanton as one of Lincoln's assassins, he had not even been in Washington on April 14th. Instead, he was in Elmira in upstate New York. The morning Lincoln died, John Surratt heard the news of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Afraid that his name might be connected with Booth's, he fled to Canada. Then he decided that fleeing to Europe offered him the best chance of survival. In Rome, Italy, he joined the Pope's army and eluded capture for a year. In Maryland, Lieutenant David Dana of the 13th New York Cavalry followed leads he received from the informants. Unfortunately, he was pursuing the kind of false leads that would come to haunt the manhunters in the days ahead. Little more than an hour before Lincoln died, George Azerodt rose from the humble room at the Pennsylvania House and left the hotel. As Azerodt walked along Booth's escape route just 2 blocks from Ford's Theater, he tossed his knife under a carriage step into the gutter. A few minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman looking out a third-story window in a building across the street saw it there. The clue, still in its sheath, was taken to the chief of police. From New York City came an offer to help 12 hours after Stanton had asked its chief of police to send its finest detectives to Washington to help track the president's killer. Stanton also summoned Lieutenant Lafayette C. Baker, one of his favorites, to leave New York for Washington. The executive branch of the government, Vice President Johnson, and the cabinet had survived the night. No other assassinations had occurred. No invading rebel army stormed the Capitol. Secretary Stanton attempted to coordinate the efforts of the local police force, detectives, and the army. Booth and his conspirators had to be caught before they vanished into the Deep South, where they would find aid and comfort in the heart of the Confederacy. At the farm, Dr. Mudd's wife, Frances, rose early, called for her servants to prepare breakfast, and woke her husband. After only 2 hours of sleep, David Harold walked downstairs and joined the Mudds for breakfast, while a servant carried breakfast upstairs for Booth. Booth, his mind and body still exhausted from his great day, stayed in bed. He was too far from Washington to hear the ringing bells of the city's churches trolling in mourning. As he made casual conversation at the breakfast table, Harold appeared unaware of the danger he faced. He was running for his life, but seemed to the Mudds not to have a care in the world. He asked for a razor so he could shave, and asked Dr. Mudd if he would make a pair of crutches for Booth. Mudd fashioned a crude pair out of a piece of plank and sent them up to Booth. By 8 a.m., George Azerodt had walked to Georgetown on the way to his cousin's house. He showed up at Matthews and Company's store and paid a call on an acquaintance. He tried to raise some money, first by selling his watch, then by using his revolver as collateral for a $10 loan. Azerodt left the store with the money and continued his journey. He would leave Washington. He knew a place where he thought he would be safe. At the executive mansion, the soldiers carried the president's body into its temporary coffin to the second floor for an autopsy. Cutting open Abraham Lincoln's brain and body served little scientific purpose. The surgeons already knew what had killed him, a single bullet through the brain. They hid their morbid curiosity behind the shield of scientific investigation. One surgeon reached for his saws and knives, while the others watched, and they wanted the bullet. The nation could hardly bury its martyred father Abraham with a lead ball lodged in his brain. They cut it out, marked it as evidence, and preserved it for history. His blood, according to the newspaper report, was drained for his corpse by an embalmer, transferred to glass jars, and preserved. When they were finished, Mary Todd Lincoln sent a request. Please cut off a lock of his hair for her. With Dr. Mudd providing advice and assistance, Harold rode to Bryantown to find a buggy or carriage to transport Booth south. When they got within sight of the edge of town, Harold yanked back hard on the reins and brought his horse to a stop. He could not believe what he saw several hundred yards ahead. Mounted men wearing a uniform Harold recognized. Yankee cavalry. Manhunters. Harold had just spotted the 13th New York Cavalry. Lieutenant Dana had led his troops into Bryantown, a well-known place of Confederate intrigue, commandeered the tavern, and occupied the town. Dana intended to establish a command center there and, from Bryantown, launch cavalry patrols through the surrounding countryside in pursuit of the Lincoln and Seward assassins. They were just a few miles from Mudd's farm. This was the closest the pursuers had gotten to Booth since the assassination. Harold made a quick decision to get out of Bryantown before he could be spotted by the cavalry. He told Mudd he didn't need a carriage after all. Booth could still ride a horse. Mudd was puzzled by the sudden change in plan, as Booth had not yet told Mudd he was Lincoln's assassin. Mudd continued into Bryantown at a relaxed pace, just as he had done on countless Saturday afternoons. He went about his business, buying supplies, greeting friends and neighbors he passed in the streets. But a strange, wild atmosphere hung over Bryantown. The cavalrymen's faces were angry. Mudd wondered what had happened. Then someone blurted it out. Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated in Washington last night. He died early this morning. The cavalry is here in pursuit of the assassin who escaped. Detectives and soldiers were searching the Maryland countryside, hunting the murderer. Most astonishing of all was who had done it. It was the actor John Wilkes Booth. Mudd remained calm and did not betray the secret known, at this moment, to him alone. America's most wanted man was hiding in a farmhouse less than 5 miles away. Harold rode to the farm to warn Booth. When he arrived, Booth was still in bed, but he wouldn't be for long. "The cavalry is here," Harold warned. They were just down the road in Bryantown. It was around 3 p.m. Saturday, April 15th, and Booth was in grave danger. Only Samuel Mudd stood between him and disaster. Mudd had the power to end the manhunt for Lincoln's killer that afternoon. All he had to do was tell the soldiers that John Wilkes Booth and his accomplice were hiding at his farm. He could tell them Booth had a broken leg. He cannot run away. He could take them to Booth right now. All he had to do was tell them, and Dr. Samuel A. Mudd would become instantly a national hero.